Today is Sunday, September 29th, 2024, and this is episode 281, wow, of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Good evening, Jerry. And now that we have video, everyone sees that you're at your secret Southern Command in an undisclosed location.
That's right.
Yeah, you post lots of pictures, so I guess it's not all that undisclosed, but...
No.
Yes. And meanwhile, I'm, here in Atlanta. So I'm not jealous. Not jealous. Just,
Looks like we're going to get our second hurricane, though, in a week.
Man, it's been crazy. I don't know if you followed, how badly the Asheville area has been hit. And, all of their major roads in and out of town have been destroyed, and power's out and comms are out. It's like, wow, that's... I feel for those folks, but, being in our industry, it did make me think, hey, be sure to make sure you can take care of yourself and your pets for an extended period of time when these sorts of things happen. You never know when that sort of thing can. I don't think anybody forecasted that happening. And
no, it certainly wasn't on any projections I saw. Looked like it was always going to go off towards the interior of the U.S. But that is, it's wild, and I feel for everybody that has been impacted.
Indeed. But anyway,
good
luck on your second hurricane.
I heard if it does happen, it's highly likely to be named Kurt, than Captain Kirk. So.
Okay. I didn't know that. Is that true?
Yeah. It's the next name in the in the shuffle.
All right. Well, I don't have a good joke for that one. I think we should just move on.
Just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. But as you're wont to say, that could change for the right price.
That's true. It's true. It's probably a big price, but it could change.
All right. We have a couple of interesting stories today. One, first up, comes from Cybersecurity Dive. The title here is CrowdStrike's Mea Culpa, 5 Takeaways from the Capitol Hill Testimony. I have to say, before we get into it, how crazy, I can't come up with the right adjective, it must be to have to testify about this in front of Congress.
Yeah. What exactly is Congress's mandate, and what do they expect to do with this? I don't know. It's wild. I'm not taking a political stance on it. I don't, how do I say this politely? Congress critters are not known for their technical skills.
Well, I think they like to be seen as holding people to account, and whether or not that's true or justified or anything. It's just the way it is with them. I also found it very interesting, and I wonder if there was some kind of a lottery held within the executive ranks of CrowdStrike to figure out who was going to have to go and testify in front of Congress. The person that apparently drew the short straw was Adam Myers, who is the SVP of Counter Adversary Operations. Now, part of me thinks that he was probably, he lost the lottery. But on the other hand, I think that he probably represents the part of CrowdStrike that might resonate most, with Congress in terms of being able to, tend to talk more about the foreign adversaries, which I think is what those, the people in Congress are more likely going to be interested in hearing about.
Yeah, it's fair. I think the way Congress looked at this is in many ways they've outsourced some of their cyber defense to CrowdStrike.
Hmm.
And, they're frustrated and upset over what happened.
Yeah.
And, but you're right. You would almost expect typically a CEO or a chairman or somebody at that level to be the one who goes to be held account by Congress. But I wonder what that was like. Do you think they drew straws?
I put names in the hat. Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know. It was interesting, but again, I think he did as far as I can tell, did a pretty good job. It is surprising, like you said, that the CEO didn't testify. That's
Yes.
typically what you see. But hey, it is what it is. So they did this report does talk, or this article, I should say, does talk about five things that came out of that testimony. First was an admission of CrowdStrike's testing process having failed. And by the way, when I read that, the first thought that came into my mind was, holy cow, any litigation that CrowdStrike is now going through just got a hell of a lot worse, a hell of a lot harder, because
Yeah.
basically stood up in front of Congress and testified that they screwed up. Which I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to realize that they did screw up. But they did point out, or Adam Myers did point out, that they had a deficiency in their testing process, where I think I would characterize it as that they were testing each individual channel file separately, and it was when they were all stacked together that the fun started.
Indeed. So
Um,
when we get a moment, I did look up some interesting things about their terms and conditions that we can talk about in terms of litigation.
okay,
Go, I want to go through the points before because it'll resonate more when we see all the takeaways. So
sure.
carry on, sir.
Sure. So the second takeaway was CrowdStrike explains why it needs kernel access. And I think we've talked about this one ad nauseum.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything particularly novel that came out of this, other than just reiterating the fact that, they use that access to have, the right level of visibility into what's happening in the operating system, and then also to prevent tampering, by malicious actors. And now, separate and apart from that, by the way, Microsoft recently held a summit where they have plot a course forward where uh, it they're going to create some facility. I don't understand how it's going to work yet, where things don't have to be in the kernel to get that level of protection. So I think
I
Microsoft
do.
also moving in that direction.
Yeah. I do think, this was only brought up once, and I think this part of the narrative quickly got covered up, but, or I suppressed in the media at least, that there's very much a competitive, almost arms race here about kernel access.
Mhm.
And I think that they're very worried about, hey, they want to be on a level playing field, especially with Microsoft's offerings. So, one thing they do mention as well is kernel access gives them performance. So,
Yes.
as you know, one thing that we've often fought is agents slow down machines. And so I think there's a lot of competing technological considerations here as to why that kernel access matters so much. And I do remember a number of their competitors and other uh, folks pontificating shortly after this happened about why do they even need kernel access? You don't need it. Well, they're coming out pretty strong saying we do, or we need an equivalent that doesn't exist that maybe Microsoft will make for us. But right now, we can't survive without it.
Yeah, and I think you- within the past 2 or 3 weeks, again, Microsoft held a summit. I think they've
Mhm.
plot a course forward where they will provide some additional uh, functions that don't require hooking into the kernel, but they don't exist yet, or at least they largely
Right.
don't exist yet. And so this is, I think, more of a forward-looking statement. But today, as it stands, they and most other security companies are actually hooking into the kernel, and that's just the way it is. All right. Third takeaway is CrowdStrike customers now control content update cadence. And so this one I thought was the most meaningful. I hadn't ever heard a definitive stance on what they were going to change. And this
Right.
kind of solidified that they were implementing kind of the concentric rings of testing, which is what you see in other large scale updates like Windows updates and whatnot. They have this concept of, internal testing within Microsoft. And then, you as a customer can designate some portion of your environment to be kind of pre-production, and they get the updates first, and then you sign off on that before it goes to the rest of your environment. So I think in some regards, that's what you normally see. But when we get to, I think it's the next one or one of the next ones, I'm not sure. I think it starts to break down a little bit. Yeah, so
Well, yeah, and I want to dig into this because I've got some notes here too that now they're giving customers choices about when they get these updates,
right,
and also the ability to defer all updates until they choose. In fact, quoting for mission critical systems or things that you would prefer to wait for longer for, they can choose to do that. But that comes, of course, with the risk that they're not getting the most up to date threat intelligence information provided to their system. Um, and somewhere in here, I think it's later in a point, they talk about 10 to 12 updates per day for Windows sensors. So, kind of launching off to a side topic here for just a moment. One of the things that CrowdStrike has often touted is they have this breach warranty of $1 million if you have enough sensors. And I was very curious what, if anything, would be affected by this change. Is that warranty only in effect if you are automating updates as soon as available to all of your agents? I couldn't actually figure that out. So I was doing some digging, and best I can tell from the T's and C's, it applies if you are on the measured security policy, which means the configuration settings, actions, and remediation described in the then current Falcon Complete operating model guided as measured. I'm not a customer of CrowdStrike, so I couldn't get access to that documentation. But I'm very curious. Like, it's very clear in their T's and C's, hey, you've got to be running in this mode, whatever that mode means, for this breach warranty up to $1 million to apply, amongst some other qualifiers. But I'm very curious if this changes that warranty. Because let's say, you get popped by ransomware that they put out a definition update on yesterday, you're deferring it. It didn't get rolled to your systems.
it's
Does
hard
that
to
still
imagine
apply?
that it wouldn't. I can't imagine that it wouldn't impact that warranty.
So that's a very clear trade-off
Right.
between security updates and potential disruption,
Yeah.
and which is more valuable to your environment. Um, I do want to, as I was looking through the T's and C's, I found their disclaimers statement, which it's long, but I want to read it because it's interesting if you'll indulge me for a moment. Disclaimer, except for, and you can find this online. So, except for the limited warranty provided in section blah, 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 of this warranty agreement, this is provided as is. CrowdStrike and its affiliates disclaim all other warranties, whether express, implied, statutory, or otherwise, to the maximum extent permitted under applicable law. CrowdStrike and its affiliates and suppliers specifically disclaim all implied warranties of merchantability, fitness for a particular application, title, and non-infringement with respect to Falcon Complete. There's no warranty that Falcon Complete will be error-free or that it will operate without interruption or will fulfill any of the customer's practical purposes or needs. Falcon Complete is not for use in endpoints used in the operation of aircraft navigation, nuclear facilities, emergency communication systems, weapon systems, direct or indirect life support systems, air traffic control, or any application or installation where failure can result in death, severe physical injury, or property damage. So, I mean, this is very common, by the way. Nobody reads this stuff, but they're very much saying, hey, look, if it's really important to you, we don't warranty it. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, which by the way is, like you said, very common in software
Yep.
of any kind, right? You go look at your cloud contract for your cloud provider, or any software provided by large companies, it's going to have similar kinds of language.
Last thing I'll say, and then give the floor back to you, is while I was looking this up, I did notice they also had a forced arbitration clause in their T's and C's.
Interesting.
Not surprising, but
No, not surprising.
So for those who don't know what that means, basically you can't just straight out sue them. You've agreed to go to arbitration,
Right.
and which is different than a court case. So, I mean, first they'll have to overcome that in the T's and C's they signed before they could even take them to court directly.
True. True. I think that it comes back to the details. Like, in the case
Yeah.
of what just happened, the reason we're talking about this, that was gross negligence. That those terms are not new and they're not novel, yet
Right.
Delta will be taking them to court, not to arbitration. And the reason is because they're alleging gross negligence.
Right.
And
Right.
so, yeah, interesting.
I mean,
Oh, go ahead.
one last caveat: unless Delta negotiated custom T's and C's,
True.
which is possible, right? This is their stated. Yeah, but every time you get into these, any enterprise lawyers are probably going to carve these up and ask for changes. And so we have no idea what was in their particular contractual agreements, just for
True.
the record.
Good point. Next takeaway was CrowdStrike changed its policy to treat content updates as code. I think that kind of goes back with their commitment to improving their testing and oversight. Not a lot there. And then the last takeaway was that and you said this a couple minutes ago, that they are intending to continue, or at least they haven't signaled that it's going to change, that they will be releasing configuration or content updates 10 to 12 times a day on average, which I think, for me, that's where the concept of the stage testing starts to fray a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's great if with the concept of Windows updates, they come out once a month, maybe twice a month, if Microsoft screws up. But in that instance, you can actually, you can do an internal pilot of updates on some subset of systems. But when you have something coming out with 10 updates a day,
Yeah.
you really can't do that. So I don't know how that's going to work. I don't know what it buys you. I can only assume that if you are going to take a hard line on testing, you're not going to be able to consume them that fast.
Right. And that is the trade-off. It's good that a customer can make this trade-off, but people need to understand that the trade-off is between rapid security updates and potentially stability. And what's more important to you?
Yeah.
But there is that trade-off. You can't have both right now. Like that just, it's one or the other in some cases. I mean, you can probably find some happy medium of how you roll it out and what you check for. And frankly, probably, I would like to think that CrowdStrike is much less likely to have another outage like this anytime soon because they're so hyper aware of it now. But that could be wishful thinking. But this is something I've been saying from the beginning on this one, that there's value in these rapid updates that we shouldn't lose sight of when we're trying to determine this trade-off of what makes sense for our organization.
Well, I think from an industry perspective, there was a lot of concern that what happened with CrowdStrike and Microsoft Windows, would not, that the distrust of auto updates would extend well beyond just security software and cause people to not want to apply patching, not to adopt auto updates,
right,
for other things like patches and traditional antivirus and whatnot. And that, I think, comes with a lot of downside. So this, I, like you said, my intuition and my experience is that now CrowdStrike has had this problem. They're either never going to have another one, or they're going to have another one real soon, and then another one, and then another one. It's like there's no in the middle.
Yeah.
They're going to learn from this, or they're not.
Right. And that's, I'm sure that they're having that very detailed conversation internally of like, we can't let this happen again.
Oh yeah.
And then that becomes interesting, because does that potentially change their behavior and leave more of a time gap between new intelligence and pushing out sensors? Like this is a push-pull. This is a continuum of, and there's something always has to give. So it'll be curious to see, do they start to have a problem,
Yeah,
more of a problem?
it's kind of a zero sum game for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but
we shall see.
they the Adam Myers, who spoke in front of Congress, I think he made the comment that it takes years to build customer confidence, but only a couple of minutes to lose it.
Yeah.
And they're clearly having to go rebuild that confidence, and I think they're on their way. Having that happen again would be, I don't want to say existential is probably overstating it, but it would be really bad.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to our next story. This one comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title is Ireland fines Meta 91 million euros for storing passwords in plain text. So this, by the way, comes from 2019. So this has been percolating for quite some time. Back in 2019, Meta disclosed to their data protection regulator, who is the DPC, the Data Protection Commission in Ireland, that they, in as they describe it, in a routine security assessment, found that they were storing millions of passwords in an unencrypted form. So I think everybody knows that you should not do that. They should be stored in some kind of a one-way with some kind of a one-way hash with a salt, so that it makes it very difficult, though not impossible, to recover. And so there were, I would say, two things that Meta ran afoul of. Number one was obviously they stored the data, in a manner that was not in concert with the expectations of the GDPR. And then the other one was that they didn't disclose it within the required time frame. I couldn't actually figure out how long it took them to disclose it, but GDPR does require you to disclose it within 72 hours, or without undue delay. But typically, I think it's in no case more than 72 hours is how I think that it's worded. But
Now, being in Europe, are those metric hours or imperial hours?
I've never, so do you multiply like by 2.2? I don't know.
Well, and then they have the extra taxes on the hour. It's complicated.
It's very
It's really complicated.
complicated. The GST.
Yeah. Okay.
So in any event, it's what I thought was interesting is that the Irish Data Protection Commission has long been viewed as, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but kind of as a lapdog for business. And that's why a lot of companies like Google, Meta, and others set up shop in Ireland, because they find the Irish Data Protection Commission to be more friendly, not
Was there a whole aspect of tax treatment as well? That Ireland was very favorable from a tax
I think there
perspective?
is. I think there is. They're certainly more pro-business, or at least historically so, than other parts of Europe. But anyway, I thought this was pretty interesting, because that's a substantial fine. It's 100 million US dollars.
Yeah.
For what was not an actual. I mean, it's certainly called a personal data breach, but as we come to think about it in lay terms, the data wasn't improperly accessed, as far as we know. Although the article does appear to have an error in it. It does say that the data was accessed by third parties. And actually, if you go and you read the statements by the Data Protection Commission, it says it was not accessed. So
this was self-discovered by Meta, self-reported by Meta, and still they were hit with a 91 million euro fine, which is interesting, right? I mean, is that going to now get some companies to roll the dice on not reporting?
So couple of things. This is Jerry's, because I feel like in some ways GDPR. I grew up with GDPR. Like I went through. I have scars on my back and all that. So number one, GDPR in large measure was made because of Facebook and Google and Amazon. So it was like the law to govern Facebook, which is now Meta,
Right.
and so that keep that context in mind.
Mhm.
And I'm not arguing the validity. It's sensible in some ways. Um, the next is I think the thing that caused them the most problem was the timing.
That
I think
not reporting fast enough.
right. And so I think
Got
that if they had been more upfront, if they had disclosed it within the required time frame, if they had kept accurate records of what happened, I think I'm not going to say they wouldn't have been fined because I don't know, but I think based on all of my exposure to the GDPR, number one, the fact that it was Meta kind of got under the skin of the data protection authorities. And number two is that they didn't, I think there's this view that you're trying to hide things.
Yeah.
And so I think that really worked against them in this instance. And so to your point, I would I would say, yeah, this kind of creates this potential moral hazard of companies not wanting to self-disclose things. But on the other hand, if you assume that, hey, it probably will get out eventually, if you don't disclose it within the required time frame, that's the thing that's going to get you in the most trouble.
Yeah.
At least that's Jerry. That's the world according to Jerry, which is probably not worth very much.
It's worth the price of admission.
It's true. Very true. All right. Moving on to our next story. This one comes from the Hacker News. And so, unless you were living under a rock, you were probably, along with the rest of us, holding your breath because there was this deep, dark, terrible, world ending Linux vulnerability that impacted every Linux distribution out there for a very long time. Remote code execution, no user intervention required, just as bad can get, was rated and apparently rated a 9.9 CV or CVSS 9.9. So almost as bad as it can get. And what turned out to be the case is look, I think this whole thing was kind of a cluster. Like the person who found it had problems reporting it. The way it was, handled by some of the Linux distributions was not great. The way it was handled and inappropriately disclosed, before it was supposed to by one of the certs. The whole thing was kind of a comedy of errors.
Not to mention the InfoSec press.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
Like,
people
yeah,
were getting their logos ready, and they were. I heard that they were like sound studios recording the theme song, and there were websites getting set up, and all.
we were getting ready to do breaking news. We were
We
just going
were,
to interrupt
we
the
were,
newscast
yeah,
with us,
yeah.
which I don't know that we even know how to do that, but we were going to do it.
I mean, CNN was like they were waiting for us.
But
But
as it turns out,
yeah, it's in cups. So it's the printing subsystem in Windows. Sorry, in Windows, in Linux, which are not installed or enabled by default on most or Linux distributions, and not enabled by people unless you're actually going to be using it for printing. That said, there are about some people did some scans with Shodan and found that there were about 76,000 systems on the internet that had cups exposed to the internet. So are potentially vulnerable. I'm going to guess that some percentage of those are probably honeypots. Some percentage are probably like embedded devices that run cups and whatnot.
well, it's also on UDP 631, which scanning UDP is not reliable.
True.
So I'm I don't know if that's a high or a low estimate, but being a UDP port, I'm always gun shy of relying any sort of broad scans.
It's fair enough. Fair enough. So
Yeah.
the vulnerability here is it's actually four different vulnerabilities that were chained together. Um, First allows an adversary to basically inject or trick cups, the cups printer browser, so the auto discovery agent, to think that there's a new printer available. And in doing so, you can feed it basically a bogus bit of telemetry about the printer, and then several subsequent vulnerabilities don't perform any kind of sanity checking on that input. And then the last vulnerability actually takes that and runs it in a shell command, which is amazing. So theoretically, for this exploit to work, an adversary can convince your Linux system that a new printer exists, and then that ultimately ends with the LP user executing some code that the adversary has chosen, so like a reverse shell or what have you. But it's not run as root; it's run as LP. But as we all know, probably systems running cups exposed to the internet are probably not fully patched anyway.
Yeah,
So,
true.
um, it's not an earth melting vulnerability by any stretch. I mean, but it is a remote code execution vulnerability for systems that are vulnerable and exposed to the internet. It's just not that prevalent. It's not as it's not it's not logo worthy, I guess is what I'll say.
Well, what's somewhat interesting to me is beyond the technical aspect of this is the researcher who found it, and I apologize if I get the name wrong, but I believe it's Simone Margaritelli, I think. Um, Known as it goes by Evil Socket on the Twitters, has taken a lot of heat
Mm-hmm.
after this, and um, watching his reaction to that heat is also probably not the best way to
You weren't
handle it.
really helping its cause. And
No, no, and like I had some sympathy at first, like that, the register hyped it, but then people are like, no, no, here's your hype that you pointed out, and here's where you said this and you said this, and so I don't know, man, it's just getting like ugly and drama filled, and but which isn't great, and I'm not a big fan of the infosec drama, and I don't think um, Simon or Simone, I'm not sure how to pronounce it exactly, is doing himself much favors in the way he's reacting, but nobody asked me. Um, However, what I do think is a valid commentary is this hype machine that gets built up around these vulnerabilities. And, I'm sure I'll go into work tomorrow and probably have a couple of executives asking me about this. And, because it got press and it got news and it can be distracting against the things that truly are real world high value problems that we're trying to solve in circumstances like this. And I don't know. This one, like you said earlier, it's just the whole thing all around it is a mess. And, this clickbaity culture around vulnerability uh, disclosure is not helping us.
no, for sure, for sure. And by the way, I I haven't read every one of Simone's. I think it's Simone. That's how you say it.
Okay.
His posts. But I genuinely think he was trying to do the right
Sure.
thing. And I think it kind of got away. The rumor mill started, and I don't know. I don't know what happened. I don't know much, but I just I feel like this wound out of control,
Yeah.
and it ended with some kind of nastiness. People flinging mud back and forth
Yeah.
in X or Twitter, whatever it's called this week.
And by the way, patches aren't even available yet, for the record.
Right. Right.
So and I'm trying really hard to somehow make a joke around two hackers, one cup, but I can't figure it out
Really.
yet. So
That joke's already been done to death, though. So
yeah.
yeah,
And if you don't understand that reference, please do yourself a favor. Don't try to figure
you,
out the reference.
you do
You
not.
will hate
Do
you will
not.
hate yourself.
Do not.
Just let it
Let it
go.
go. Let it go. Um. So what thought also was interesting is this is yet another example of where least privilege kind of comes into play.
Mhm.
If you aren't running cups, you're not impacted. If you are running cups and it's properly firewalled off, your your exposure to the vulnerability, even though there's no patches, is very, very narrow.
Yeah, it might become a fun lateral movement technique for somebody who's already inside.
Right. But it really, I think it really highlights again, though this is again, kudos, kudos to the guy that found this, right? It's a very interesting chain of events that he found. But it,
You bring up a really good point. If I could interrupt for just a moment. One thing that I had in my notes that I forgot to mention as we were talking about this is the backlash coming against this researcher is also not helpful.
no,
Because to your point, we want these things found and disclosed, and we want these things fixed. And going after somebody who finds this because you didn't like how they disclosed it probably isn't going to solve the problem either.
no, no,
So,
we need smart people. I made the joke. I made the joke recently. That perhaps many eyes doesn't always make all bugs shallow.
mhm.
Because this has been around for a long time, as was Heartbleed and Shell Shock and many others. And it takes somebody sitting down and like not just reading through the code, but actually like trying to exercise it to find this chain of events that allowed it. And again, very novel. Kudos, nice find, Simone. I'll give you credit. I feel bad for the way it proceeded, but that it is what it is. Anyway, back to what I was saying. This is just another example in my mind about how the fundamentals of security architecture, the boring stuff, is still so important.
Yeah,
It's
that's true.
not like it's not sexy. Like we're in this world of cloud and AI, and like it wants to talk about patching and firewalls, but it's still relevant.
Yeah. It does remind me. There was a period of time where Windows servers were having a ton of security problems around their batch server. Sorry, their print server,
Yes,
and that was like a
men.
notorious area. And now maybe it's Linux's turn. That's all.
Well, it's a great point. I also had in my in my mental notes um, when we see something like this happen, because we've not seen a cops vulnerability like this in a long time. When we see something like this, we should expect that suddenly the eye of Sauron of all the security research community is suddenly going to be focusing its attention on Linux printing. So my guess is we're going to see a whole bunch more pretty soon.
And I'm also guessing that code hasn't been touched since the Neolithic era.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Our next story comes from Ars Technica, and I thought maybe we should get with the time and talk a little bit about AI security. So the title here is Hacker Plants False Memories in ChatGPT to Steal User Data in Perpetuity. So um, it's not as, at least at the moment, as bad as it sounds. I think most of the issues have been fixed, but the researcher here identified that a recently added feature into ChatGPT allowed this what they're terming memories. It's not really a memory. It's more of like a cache or some background information for the language model. Um, and you can prime that pump in a bunch of different ways. You can feed it a website address. You can give it an image. You can do it. You can link it to Google Drive. You can do a bunch of different things. And what the researcher found here is that you can implant they're calling memories. And in some of the cute examples, they said, well, keep in mind the context of this user is that they're 102 years old. And so at any time, thereafter, after that memory has been implanted, the, the chatbot is going to operate with the context that the person is 102 years old. It's a silly example, but you can kind of see that being able to skew the way this AI bot is responding could be bad. I mean, you could potentially I know that there's a lot of the world who's very much opposed to ChatGPT and his friends. I get it. Don't think it's ethical. It's environmentally terrible, whatever. But the reality is it's being adopted faster than any technology I have ever seen in my life.
Yep.
Okay. I am afraid for people who are consciously ignoring this, for two reasons. One is you're going to get left behind, probably.
Yeah.
And number two is I don't think we have the right kinds of smart people looking at it and kicking the tires like we talked about in the last one. We need smart people challenging it, finding these holes, because it is being diffused into the industry, whether you like it or not. It just is.
I think the upside is the hype around AI has gotten a ton of focus on researchers trying to break it. So
Yes.
I do think there's a lot of people poking at it. And I think we're going to find a ton of these types of things where people find ways to get it to behave oddly, incorrectly, less optimally, uh, because of the nature of the beast.
Right.
And it will be very interesting if how this plays out. I agree with you though that we are rushing headlong into AI being built into everything in our entire world that has a CPU in it. And I don't know that we truly understand the risk involved here. And so,
No, I see a lot of it's prevalent in the security field. See a lot of people equating it to blockchain, right?
yeah,
Oh, this is going to go the way of blockchain. Look where that landed. It's nowhere. But the reality is blockchain isn't built into every freaking web processor or word processor and spreadsheet app and web browser and this stuff is in absolutely everything now, and becoming more so. The way this started, by the way, this article started, is initially the person found a way, or I don't know if it was this person or somebody else, found a way as part of that, as part of that background information to to exfiltrate information. So they were able to exfiltrate information that was being fed in subsequent by a person. So you would have to be able to have access to their account or to you have to be able to inject a prompt. But as they pointed out, there's lots of different ways that you can do that through including images or including um, you know I'm sorry, no, websites. Wow, I'm not getting old. And so on. So um, I think the concern is while they've closed that particular hole and they've largely mitigated the things that are being reported in this particular article, this is kind of like cloud was now 20 20-ish years old, and we're still kind of in finding innovative new ways for it to be abused
but
today.
fair. Yeah. And I think this is going to follow a similar model, which is probably careful configuration and management is going to be the key.
Right.
And very, very obscure settings that are not appropriately managed, are going to cause you tons of pain. So, which is what we see now for the most part with cloud issues, that, there's so much complexity and so many choices and so many ways to shoot yourself in the foot, that most of the problems come from not managing it perfectly, which is very difficult, by the way, to get right every time. So by the way, I think there's a huge industry that's going to grow around AI from a security perspective, from a research perspective, from a prompt injection management perspective, from a, configuration perspective. I think there's going to be a massive amount of money
Hmm.
going towards people who can, quote unquote, secure AI and LLM. It might be something to look into if you're at a point in your career where you can still pivot. I mean, we're too old, we're ancient, but others can take up the torch and run. But I do think, like, it has now become a competitive mandate for almost any technology to have this type of capability in there, whether it's a good idea or not. The free market has apparently spoken, and you cannot compete in the open market without this technology, it appears. Shit. Well,
Yeah.
it's here whether we want
But
it or not.
so I do want to say, while we're pontificating for a second, or while I'm pontificating for a second, I do want to say that in some ways, I see this proceeding much more akin to the adoption of cloud. Like if in the early days of cloud, like companies were just putting crap in the cloud to say they were in the cloud.
Right.
And whether or not it made sense. And, since then we've seen a lot of rationalization, and not everything's in the cloud anymore. And it's not really a differentiator, but it is there. Like it's still there. You don't run around saying, oh, well, my application's in the cloud. That's no longer a thing. And so I think that there are a lot of use cases that are being flung against the wall right now, which probably won't stick.
Yeah.
Right? They just won't. But that doesn't mean that, overall this technology is going to go away. I think it's going to continue to find more nuanced, more diffuse use in organizations. And we're already seeing it, right, wrong, or indifferent, displacing a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a creative destruction of capitalism afoot. Like, people are going to try all sorts of things to see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
But it's going to be very sporty for, you know, probably a good 5 years.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think the other thing that I'll say about it is the the innovation cycle is happening so quickly with this.
Mhm.
And not only from like the fundamentals of technology, which is I think what is a little bit different than with cloud. Is cloud at the end of the day was just a bunch of, computing resources with a fancy front end on it. I think what we are seeing happening with AI, and I am hesitant to call it AI for a lot of reasons, but um, that as a fundamental concept is transforming really fast, and it's not transforming in the same way across all of the different players. And so, we're when we talk about AI, are we talking about large language models? Are we talking about neural networks? Are we talking about, you know, the things that answer or tries to help you out with your bank transactions? They're not all it's not all the same concept. And I think we're
Right.
seeing a lot of a lot of new use cases cropping up, and plus, there's still a lot of work on the general artificial intelligence AGI, which I know a lot of people are kind of down on that. I don't think we're that far away from something that will look like that, and that's going to be very disruptive when that happens.
We've also got a nation state component of, you know, the major players competing with each other at a national level.
Right.
China versus the US, for
It's a good
who's
point.
got better AGI. And that's driving a lot of research and dollars. And it's changing fast. Um, and I know that, this may just seem like an old guy thing to say, but it's changing faster than anything else I've seen. And
Oh,
maybe that's just
Absolutely.
State of change. I
Absolutely.
mean, I did do some of my own research. I did inject some of your mom's prompts, and it was very telling.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I was really waiting.
So was she.
All right. Our last story comes from industrialcyber.co.
That, by the way, is a heck of a domain name.
Yeah, I like the I actually is a smokestack and has a little very, very on message right here. So there was a within the past, I think, 2 weeks in Arkansas, there was a water treatment facility that had to go to manual operations because of a cyber attack. The details of that haven't really been disclosed yet, and I don't know if they will be disclosed. But this alert came out from the U.S. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, whose name I still hate, reminding operators of operational technology and industrial control systems that you really should make sure that you're operating in a secure way. I know this is an interesting industry, I guess, because a lot of people who work in the OT, ICS industry and security in that industry will look at us people in IT and say, "Well, you guys have no freaking clue what you're doing." But my perhaps naive view from the sidelines is it while it's been a while around, at least as long as IT, it feels like it is proceeding from an attack target in the same way that IT did. And by that I mean a lot of the same issues that befell corporate IT are starting to befall these industrial controls, password reuse, the lack of two-factor authentication, password stuffing, things exposed improperly to the internet. When you read through the guidelines that CISA published, you see strong parallels to very fundamental concepts in IT security.
Yep.
And
And that-
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say I'm sure this is where you're going next. Like, why is that? Is it that these have now just they were isolated for so long, and now they're starting to become networks finally, and now they're finally being exposed to the same problems, and in the past they were, fairly air gapped, or was it just not targeted much in the past?
I th- I suspect it's all that plus there's now a critical mass of them, because realistically, a lot of this stuff, a lot of the technology underpinnings of these industrial processes are long lived. Like they are, you know, 20, 30, 40-year capital investments. It's not like a server that you depreciate over the course of 5 years. They're long time investments. And so, I suspect we're at a point now where a lot of this stuff has turned over and we're seeing more and more, plus the fact that, that we, as a civilization, we're just continuing to grow and become more automated. And there's always demand to operate more efficiently, and operating more efficiently almost always means technology that's remotely accessible
And therefore
Well,
attackable.
and therefore attackable.
Yeah.
And historically, I think you know, there hasn't been kind of like in the early days of IT, there wasn't a lot of focus on the fundamentals, like designing applications and industrial control systems that have no default passwords or that mandate multi-factor authentication and whatnot. So it's very interesting. And when you read the article, there's a few things in here that kind of irritated me a little bit. One of them was agencies being the U.S. government, advocate for the publication of software bill of materials to help system owners identify and mitigate vulnerabilities in underlying software libraries. I just wonder, okay, you've got a wastewater treatment company. What are they going to do with an S-bomb?
Well, this brings up a very key point, which is I don't think it's the same type of buyer that's used to buying corporate IT solutions who would care
No,
about these things yet. It's a
right?
complete different buyer with a complete different motivation and, not knowing to even ask for these things. They're a different class of engineer doing different things. And, where I think IT and IT security has gotten a little more mature and we're a little more intent on asking for things like multi-factor authentication from the people we're buying software from. I think with people buying this, like they care more about the fact that I'm buying a pipeline management system that has some automation.
Hmm.
And the pipeline stuff is, the valves and the flow rate and all these things I don't understand, but I'm pretending to right now. That's the stuff that those buyers care more about. They're not reviewing the deep details of the technical side of it like IT folks and security folks probably do. They're just different. They're just a different expertise, a different mindset. So to your point, trying to apply best practices from the IT world to this probably is not going to work well. Uh, I mean, unless you want to go the other way around and say, hey, all you SCADA people who are buying all these big, massive control systems, you need to hire like general IT nerds to help you understand this.
What? So where I was, I guess where my mind goes,
Yeah.
between that concept and one of the other concepts they talk about a process design to make sure that um, you're properly designing your systems so that you're accounting for the potential of a breach, right? So that somebody can't, get in and dump all the chlorine into the waters at one go. Or silly example, right? Um, but I think where this is going, if you were to play it out in your mind, or at least if I play it out in my mind, is it on the IT side, we can do stuff with S bombs and whatnot because we have a CISO and we have a staff of security people, we have vendor management people, and we have source code scanning people and vulnerability scanning people, and we have all of these IT security operations people in large companies, obviously not evenly distributed. But to me, it feels like when I read this thing, the thing that bounced around in my mind was it feels like we're moving in the direction of having operational, like a COSA, chief operational security,
Right.
person. So anyway, it's an interesting problem domain. I'm certainly not, I did 30 years ago, did work in industrial control. So I have a little bit of exposure to them, but that was like two lifetimes ago. And I'm
Yeah.
sure,
And you were running like on Etch a Sketches, weren't you?
well, what else did you have?
Your string system for
What,
remote operation was,
or vacuum tubes and
yeah, it was impressive for the era.
I to me it feels like there's an emerging market around security for these OT ICS environments that hasn't really been um, borne out yet. And I feel like CISA is starting, they're not saying it outright, but it feels like they're starting to put pressure behind it that's going to end up with that being the case. And so I know there's a lot of people out in the world right now, trying to find new work. This might be jobs. This might be a place to start looking.
Well, one last thing I'll say in this is that I often get the impression that the folks who are running the OT side of the house are an independent siloed group from the IT department in these companies.
Mhm.
And they're not like, it's a different domain. It's a different sense of everything. They're like, we don't want you, Windows jockeys screwing with our pipelines. I'm just
And
picking on
I don't
pipelines.
blame them.
Right. But we don't have that cross pollination of shared memory and acquired wisdom as a result. And it's almost like they're going to have to relearn the lessons we already learned.
And based on what we see here, I think that relearning of the same lessons is already underway.
Yeah.
And so we can already look and see how it played out on the IT side. And I don't see any reason to think it would play out differently on the OT side. And that was my point.
I bet the OT experts in the room would disagree because they're different and they have their own special needs.
I don't in any way dispute that. No dispute. However, it does require specific, thoughtful design and management. And I think what this is pointing out is that largely that is deficient. It's not present.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yet another happy ending to
And on that cheery note,
we gotta start finding like happy stories to end.
Like human interest stories, like, yeah.
Yeah,
Cat rescued from a well.
Back during the first story, we kept talking about deferring updates, and I have a long-haired dog, and she's actually sleeping at my feet right now. Deferring to a dog owner is a whole different thing. Because you have to
Deferring.
when you leave, you have to defer your clothes.
Yes. Well, I have 3 cats, so I understand. Yeah. Yeah. One of which is completely white. So, and I wear a lot of dark color clothing. So I typically have to get one of the lint rollers to get all the Betty fur off of me, but she's worth it.
You live our animals. Yep. All right. So thank you again to everybody for listening / watching. Hopefully you found this interesting. And we continue to try to get better. I'm sure we'll continue to get better.
Trying is the key word.
Like I said, I figure about another 720 episodes.
Seems reasonable.
And I figure we'll know what we're doing by then. But around about episode 1000, we'll have it nailed.
Yeah, that's true. And hey, we might have an opportunity to practice in new and interesting ways soon.
Very, very soon. Yeah.
It's a little hint.
All right. Thank you again. And you can follow Mr. Kalat on the social medias.
Yes, at Lerg, Lerg, on the X/Twitters of the world, and on your lovely Mastodon instance in the Fediverse, infosec.exchange. Same at Lerg, Lerg.
You can find me on the Fediverse at Jerry at infosec.exchange. And by the way, I have had a lot of people signing up over the past 2 weeks or so, specifying that they joined because of the podcast. So,
wow. How many quit because of the podcast?
I don't know. I'm sure it's not 0. Anyway, we'll talk again next week. If not before, maybe there'll be some, breaking cups news that we have. Take care, everybody.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.